Welcome to another episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast. Today we are going to speak with Yinam Cohen. He is the Consul General of Israel to the Midwest. And we are very pro-Israel on this show, but we're very open-minded as well. I would be willing to talk to anybody on this show that is a decent person and has something to say and points to back it up. And Yinam Cohen has just that. We're going to talk about Palestine. We're going to talk about Hamas. We're going to talk about Israel. And most importantly, we're going to talk about what gives him hope in the future. And that is coming up with Yinam Cohen next.
It's time for the Michele Tafoya podcast.
Yinam Cohen, thank you so much for being here. These are strange, difficult, painful times. I haven't spoken to you since before October 7th, so let's just start there and your first reaction to what happened that day.
You know, it is the most devastating day in the short 75-year-long history of the State of Israel. We experienced the biggest terrorist attack in our history. We're talking about at least 1,200 people that have been killed in Israel, the vast majority of them civilians. But it's also the scope and the scale, because they were murdered in the most barbaric way one can imagine, much worse than ISIS. So this is where we're standing, and since then, you know, we went on a war on this terrorist infrastructure of Hamas to restore stability and security in the region.
What have you made of the reaction? Quite frankly, to me, it's been astonishing, the pro-Palestinian and frankly pro-Hamas reaction around the world. What do you make of this?
You know, here in this country, I want to speak about the United States. We've seen a lot of marches and demonstrations that are pro-Palestinian and, as you're saying, pro-Hamas, because what they're chanting there is basically not only praising Hamas and the act of so-called resilience. I don't know how burning babies alive is resilience, but they're also chanting something that should be very clear to everybody. What they're saying is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And, you know, there's a lot of naive, I would say even stupid college kids who follow that chant, but we have to explain what that means. When they're talking about the river to the sea, they're talking about all the territory that's between River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. That's basically what contains today Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. What they mean is that they want to wipe out Israel off the map to establish a Palestinian state. And that is very, very dangerous and anti-Semitic. But Michelle, with your permission, I want to say something else, because while we're seeing all this hatred and violence on the streets, the numbers are not that significant. And if I'm looking at real numbers of people that went out to demonstrate, I was also looking at the 300,000 who gathered in Washington, D.C. this week to say three things. They said, we support Israel, we stand with Israel, we want all the hostages to be released immediately, and we stand against anti-Semitism. And that was a very, very important message. So the media tends to, in many cases, echo the margins, the fringe, but I don't think that this is the mainstream. And I'm looking also at polls in the United States. And all the polls are very consistent in showing that the mainstream of the American public opinion stands with Israel. And I think this is a strong message.
Do you think that the seat of American power, the President of the United States, the Vice President, stands strongly enough with Israel?
I think that what President Biden was a show of leadership when he arrived to Israel 1 week after the terrorist attack, showing not only solidarity with the people of Israel, but also translating that into real action in deploying to aircraft carriers and other, military forces and sending ammunition to Israel. So I'm grateful to President Biden.
The reaction, however, we've had military bases all over the region, U.S. military bases that are there to support and attacked. And yet the response has been lukewarm. I'm not sure that's sending the actual message of strength to Iran, who is propping up Hamas. What do you think about that?
You're totally right in identifying the major problem. And the major problem, the major issue in the Middle East is Iran. Iran is is the epicenter of the axis of evil in the Middle East, with proxies deployed all around our region. Their fingerprints are really in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, the Houthis in Yemen. For the first time since in history, ballistic missiles, I should say Iranian ballistic missiles were shot from Yemen to Israel. That's 1,000 miles. So definitely this is a major issue. How we should deal with Iran, I have a very clear understanding about what we should do. That Iran should be isolated, Iran should be sanctioned, and Iran should get the clearest message that this way that they've chosen should not be allowed in our region.
So how comfortable and confident are you in this idea that the sanctions that were released, the sanctions that have been eased, first $6 billion with the prisoner exchange and then another $10 billion this week, they say it's only for humanitarian use. Is that possible?
We're conducting a very close and intimate dialogue with the American administration, a dialogue amongst friends, which does not necessarily mean that we agree upon every issue. So sometimes we might have nuances and we discuss them behind closed doors because that's what friends should do. But I want to take your point even further, because I would try to appease terrorists has never proved the right way. That's what the international community tried to do for many years with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. A lot of billions of dollars of humanitarian aid was sent to the Gaza Strip. Did it reach the people of Gaza? No. What happened is that Hamas took all not just money, even supplies, pipes for sewage. They were taking that to build a huge terrorist infrastructure. Right. We're talking about more than 500 kilometers. That's 300 miles of underground tunnels all across the Gaza Strip. It is the biggest underground infrastructure in the world, and it is not serving the people of Gaza, just the terrorists. As the American administration 2 days ago just confirmed that they are using hospitals and schools as infrastructure to launch their terrorist activities. So this is a major problem, and appeasing terrorist organizations never works.
Never. And yet we've got heads of Hamas reportedly living large in Qatar and other places, particularly Qatar. And I'm wondering if you think Iran should be isolated, are there other places that need to get that same message, if you will?
Absolutely so, and I think as you mentioned, Qatar has been playing a double game for many years, being supposedly, first establishing relations with every possible terrorist organization and Iran in the region, and then using its connections to this, terrorist organizations to position itself as a mediator with the West. Right now, they're invested in the negotiations to release the hostages. So I want to be cautious in what I'm saying right now. But I think that this double game, again, cannot last forever. Let's even talk about some of the media outlets that they've been financing for many years, like Al Jazeera, whose headquarters are in Qatar, and they are a major source of concern because they praise terrorism, they legitimate terrorism, they whitewash terrorism, and this is something that's very dangerous.
It's very dangerous, and it's hard for me to understand why more people don't see it, or maybe they see it, but they don't speak out about it. But to get back to your point about the march in Washington, D.C., about 300,000 people filled the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and it didn't make the front page of the Washington Post like all the other riots marches do. It was in the metro section. And so we're talking about the Washington Post here. This is, to me, it was a little stunning. What did you make of that?
Stunning is a very diplomatic word to describe that. I think that, since every demonstration of 500 pro-Hamas supporters is amplified in the press, I would expect much more coverage to this peaceful, amazing large historic demonstration. It is the biggest pro-Israel demonstration in the history of the United States. But I can talk about so many differences between this demonstration and what we see on the streets. First, it was peaceful,
Yes.
unlike the pro-Hamas demonstrations. People in this demonstration Washington D.C. did not feel obliged to cover their face with keffiyehs, as it happens in other demonstrations. It was a bipartisan demonstration. Both Republicans and Democrats were there. The Speaker of the House and the leader of the majority, of the minority in the House, leader of the majority in the Senate. It was a bipartisan thing. People were talking about love, not about hate. People in the demonstration in Washington recognized the suffering, and there is suffering in the other side, while the other side is ripping posters of kidnapped kids held by Hamas. So I think that, morally speaking, it is very clear, who stands in the right side of history. And I wish the press would, I would say, echo that in a better manner.
Well, at least in a fair and objective manner. It seems to me that they're just putting their bias on display. And, journalism has been trending in that direction for a long, long time. And it's just, I think people are finally maybe waking up to that and seeing that we're paying attention to the loudest voices, but maybe not the most voices and the wisest voices.
Exactly.
It's right now, as you and I are recording this, there is a protest on the Bay Bridge in San Francisco that connects the East Bay to the city, of San Francisco. And, there's a lot of traffic being stopped. And we see this in a lot of these sort of radical movements. They choose really disruptive ways to gain attention, and it works. The cameras are there. The news coverage is there. And so I just, it almost feels like an unfair fight, and that has to be discouraging. How do you get past that day to day?
I think, Michelle, it's a larger problem. It's part of a larger issue. And because while we see these demonstrations that in many cases praise Hamas and the terrorist attack against Israelis, it is part of a larger problem because look at the university campuses, for example.
Yes.
The culture that has been created in some of the academic spaces is appalling. The anti-Semitism in the past week has been exploding, especially in university campuses. I think it's a part of a larger culture that you, of course, deal with a lot, and that is maybe the identity politics. I just read about one professor today that said in the university in Illinois, she was excited with the terrorist attack on October 7th against Israelis because it was an act of resilience after 75 years of white Israeli supremacy. Now, you have to be so ignorant to say that because first, this Israeli speaking to you right now is not white. This identity politics, the way that American identity politics is projected towards the Middle East is ridiculous. Half of Israelis arrived from Arab countries. My grandparents arrived, Arab Jews. They arrived in the 1930s to Israel from Yemen, from Iraq, from Egypt. We have a huge African Israeli community that Israel is the only country in the world that proactively brought communities from Africa to live in Israel. We're talking about the Jewish community, in Ethiopian community in Israel. So this is ridiculous. And this identity politics in some of the academic spaces in America has gone so far away from reality. It is totally detached from reality. And I think it is time to bring back the discussion to the mainstream. This is, I think, the goal of our generation. I'm looking at kids getting the information from TikTok. Yeah. And I don't want to even start the discussion about who's behind TikTok. But right. This is outrageous. This is appalling. Right now, what's trending on TikTok? Just yesterday, the letter from Osama bin Laden, a year after 9/11. Young Americans are reading that and saying it has changed my viewpoint of the world. How ridiculous, how dangerous this is. This is what we have to talk about.
You are so right. And I think it's in the universities because it started at even younger levels. I know kids are being exposed to this before they're even 18 years old and off to college. So, it is dangerous. And I would ask people who suggest that Israel is an apartheid state. Do they even know what apartheid means? Because you can just look at the international law, and see Israel is not an apartheid state. What would you say to those people?
I'm trying to address the facts because people prefer today, unfortunately, especially younger people or far left progressive, prefer to speak not about facts, but about feelings, about perceptions, about narratives. And I think we have to bring back the discussion into the facts. And the facts are that Israel has more than 20% of our population that are Arabs. They're Israeli citizens. The vast majority of them are Muslims. They're, Supreme Court judges. They're fellow diplomats. They're, of course, ministers, parliament members. Many of them right now are fighting in Gaza against Hamas. Many of them have been killed by Hamas. Around 50 Israeli Muslims have been killed by Hamas on October 7th. Right now, Hamas is holding Israeli Muslim citizens hostages in Gaza Strip. So, this dichotomy of this really simplistic dichotomy of white and non-white, of oppressing and oppressed, of Jews and Palestinians is so simplistic, and we have to talk more about the facts. People need to understand the facts, but many of them refuse to talk about the facts because they prefer to talk about feelings and narratives.
Yes, it's exactly right. I remember where I was on October 8th, the day after, and hearing about everything and having someone who was with me say, well, this is awful, but, I am sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. And I thought, but you're talking about two totally different things here. This is Hamas. This is Iran's proxy attacking savagely innocent people. So now they've used this as a way to conflate those two ideas. The other thing that's been astonishing to me is that you've seen interviews with people in Gaza, interviews interrupted because the people, the normal average people in Gaza are saying, why are Hamas living among us? I've seen two of these interviews and then they're cut off. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. And I say to those people too, by the way, I'm also sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I want the Palestinians to live decent life. I want every Palestinian mother and every Palestinian child to have really a decent future. But Hamas is not about that.
No.
They don't care about the Palestinian cause. They don't care of the two-state solution. They want to eradicate Israel. They want a one-state solution, a one Palestinian state over the whole territory. As President Biden said, they're not interested in peace. They're interested in killing as many Jews as they can, and this is what they're doing. And one of their spokespersons just last week said, we'll do it over and over again if we can. So what we have to guarantee right now is that they cannot do that again. This is our goal.
Well, before I let you go, then I want to ask you a question that I ask almost every one of my guests, and you in particular. This is an important question. What gives you hope right now?
Let me tell you what gives me hope. In 2 weeks from now, we're going to host here in Chicago a delegation of young leaders from the Middle East, from various countries in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Egypt, and Israel. And they're going to speak about the common future that we have together. Just 3 years ago, Michelle, you know that very well, we started the Abraham Accords, the biggest accomplishment for peace in the Middle East, which brought together Israelis and many Arab countries. We were, right before October 7th, negotiating the expansion of the Abraham Accords, bringing Saudi Arabia into the Accords. And I think the interests of the moderate Arab countries in the region have not changed. They still want to have peace with Israel. They want to enhance the circle of peace. They're now understanding even better than before October 7th that Hamas and radical Islamism is not just a threat to Israel. It's a threat to the stability and the order in their countries. So they understand that their future is with Israel, not with Iran and not with Hamas. So that brings me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I think those Abraham Accords and the developments that were forthcoming really didn't make Iran very happy. And the timing is not lost on anyone. Yinam Cohen, it is wonderful to speak with you. I'll say it loud and proud. I stand with Israel. We are your friend. And I hope that you're right. And I'm going to be watching for these young leaders coming together in Chicago. I pray that it goes well. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Michele, for having me. Thank you.
As always, folks, I end the podcast by saying be brave and do good. And we will see you next time.